Hey, good morning, Professor Tootle.
Good morning.
So I think this was the longest break that we've had in our 6 years of doing this. So I looked up Dog Days of Summer. Do you know what Dog Days of Summer means?
I don't know the origin of the term.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting little history. It goes back to the Greeks, I think. I just did a quick skim but I mean it's been around a long time, and it's historically like 3 weeks ending in August 11th. Where just it's too hot and it's too humid and we just can't really do anything. We're kind of lethargic and sorry, I'm not doing that. And so it was kind of inappropriate that we took 3 weeks off during the dog days of summer.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I always have to miss the Friday when we do what's called convocation, which is the Friday, the first Friday or the Friday before school starts is
And
one show we always have to cancel. And then,
but is that a get ready students, so it's not a
yeah,
graduation?
we have an all hands meeting and all we do try to do or set up all of the administrative work that we have to do for the semester on that
Uh-huh.
one day, and then
Okay.
so that we can just work for the rest of the semester. You know?
Rock and roll. Yeah,
Yeah,
just like those sailors that have been on the boat for, I don't know, 600 days or however many days it's been. You got to just work, 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 Professor. When school starts, you got to work.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. So, Professor, I have mixed feelings about today's conversation. So, you're going to help guide me as you always do. I'm still optimistic about America. I'm still shocked on how little I know and how much more I need to learn. I'm occasionally chagrined about you and our high school history professor friend, who's or teacher, not professor, but who's with us, kind of lamenting the state of students and their lack of desire to read a lot or read real books or instead of just like cheat.
Read
No, not
anything
only
now.
cheat.
Yeah,
Yeah, I just mean like get through the lazy way, or I get it, and I was a student too. I there was a thing called Cliff Notes before you were born, and I get that. So the AI is, I guess, better than Cliff Notes. So anyway, I
I
get
think now AI or Cliff Notes would be considered like punishment. That would
yeah,
be that would
that's
be
true.
like so much work to read the Cliff Notes of a book.
You have
Students
to
would object
have
to
to read
that level of reading.
this. You have to read the theme and the symbology and the
Yeah.
foreshadowing. You have to learn stuff even by Cliff Notes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I get your point. So, Professor, I'm still optimistic, but I do have some chagrin, I think, and it's partially because I did interview my Democratic Socialist acquaintance, which was a really interesting conversation, and I think everybody should go interview a Democratic Socialist because I think they'll be both surprised and interested and a little perturbed or scared or but I was young too. I said all sorts of stupid stuff when I was young. I said stupid stuff last week or maybe this morning. I get it. We're all human and we don't know everything. And so today's conversation is what do we really need to know? I mean, is it current events? Do we all need to become experts on whether the president should have been snuck off in a catering truck? Is that the protocol? And so we all do some Google searches to see if that's ever happened before. And did those other people, all said every current event, we all have to become experts of the day and we all wag on it. And by the way, I'm a human being. I like talking around the water cooler. It's good, to know what's going on and hear the latest crime or the latest sensation or the scandal in town and nationally and what's going on. I get it. We're all humans. We want to kind of know what's going on. Or do we really want to read history? And do we want to understand in context, as you often refer to, what it means and should this be important or not? So I'm hoping you give some guidance in the next 45 minutes or so. So I'd like to start with current events um, just for a minute. The Odyssey, yeah, a current event. Um, did you see it, the movie?
No, not yet. This weekend I'm supposed to go see it.
Yeah, I think it's really worthwhile. My wife didn't want to go, so I went with a daughter, and she didn't like it at all. And I get it. I didn't like history when I was a young person either. But in hindsight, I think it was a really interesting event. It's a big event. That's what movies are for. Some big war scenes and stuff, and drama, and the poetry I didn't quite get. And I don't think I've ever read it, but boy, I had deja vu all over again during the whole thing. So maybe I did read it in high school or college, and I just forgot because there was nothing new to me, so to speak. It was all. But
Hmm.
it did occur to me, and I did read Professor Brasino's review of it, thought it was amazing. But the bottom line, I don't want to spoil it for you. Would this be a spoiler, Professor?
I don't care. You can't spoil something that's thousands of years old, you know.
Right, right. At the end, you get to be king if you can string the bow and shoot it through a bunch of axes and hit a target. You get to be king, except there's a bunch of people that aren't willing to accept that. They're going to kill you right then because you're going to be the king and they wanted to be the king and the suitor. So he has to kill like 30 people all at once. Sorry to spoil the whole movie for you, but it's a big dramatic scene at the end. It's just pure raw force of strength and accuracy, experience of shooting a bow and arrow. And then, no, you got to kill a bunch of people. Okay, well, good, you're king. So, hooray. What a hero. Brute force. It's kind of the history of the human race, isn't it?
Yeah, up until the United States was founded.
Yeah. So what do we really need to know, Professor? And that's kind of maybe I'm perplexed because I'm reading your friend's book here.
Yeah, yeah.
And have you finished it yet, or are you still in the midst of it?
I finished. I think I'm about three-quarters of the way through.
Okay, you're a little bit ahead of me, but I bet you don't have this many sticky notes. I mean, look at
No.
that. That is insane. And not all of them I like. There was something that I don't like that point, or I need to think through it more. But there was
We
all no,
need
there
to
was
have
no.
another show where you go through your sticky notes with Tony, you know.
We might do
We
that.
yeah, get
We
him
might.
back here
Yeah,
and have
we should. 'Cause it's a really intriguing book. I truly had no idea. You've talked about it for 6 years. Sorry to just keep talking here. You'll
yeah.
you'll talk for a long time here in a moment. You've said this over 6 years, so it's not a surprise to me either. But all these people arguing, our founders, right from the get-go about what freedom means and our slaves humans, and on and on. I mean, right, and what Lincoln thought, and what George Washington thought, and what Hamilton, and I mean, they're just arguing about these big theories right from the get-go. So we're arguing
Mm.
today about all this stuff. Well, they were arguing then about all this stuff. And we've had 250 years about arguing about all this stuff. And it was kind of insightful to all put that point in one book, divided over the Declaration, what it
Mhm.
means. Shocking, because you've been saying that, but you haven't written a book. So it was interesting to see something in writing and in different, mostly different words, but the same themes. Can
Mhm.
you tell me um, one more thing, one more point for you to hang on to. I have semi promised to the world, which is Facebook, and that doesn't mean anything. But I only got one bite at it. But I have said I'd really like on our 250th anniversary, I'd like to read Ashcroft's. Ashcroft, that's wrong. That was a former attorney general. Ashbrook. Center's most important 50 reads of American history. I think it's 50.
50 core documents, yeah.
Yeah, 50 core documents. And I took a skim down that list and I read a bunch of them, but I haven't read all of them. And I go, I should probably at my age and condition kind of understand what it means to be an American. And this seems like a good as list as any. And I
Yeah.
put that out to the website and won a two-star general. He commanded 30,000 troops in Iraq. A former cabinet member in Colorado. He's been on our show once. We've never interviewed him, but a major general.
Hmm.
Said, I'd like to do that with you. Irv Halter ran for Congress and lost, but boy, what a great, and he was he's a real American statesman. And he says, I'll do that with you, John. Oh, cool. Now I've got a two-star general and me, and you've probably read 48 or 50 of all 50 over your years. And I kind of want to know, should I do that? Or should I, and by the way, just me as a one sample of 330 million Americans, should we do that? Or we should really read the daily newspaper and understand current events intensively so we can vote accordingly at the midterms and beyond. What should Americans do to be good citizens, Professor? That's the simple question. And all that stuff was just context.
Yeah, well, you've been on an airplane before, right?
Yeah.
And how do they tell you to treat your oxygen mask?
Put it on yourself first.
And then
And then,
you other
yeah,
people, right?
yeah.
So it's not that you don't help the other person, but you need to get yourself the oxygen first. So the first thing that has to happen is you have to do, and you've already done this. You have to be somebody who somewhere along the way decided that citizenship was important, that you have some sort of obligation to the rest of society, and hope however that came to you. And then you have to have some content knowledge. And after you have some content knowledge about not just history, but many other forms of content, when you study or read about events of the day, then you will know how to put them into the proper context. But if you don't study history first, you will be the knowledge that or I should say the information, the facts that you hear every day, it almost doesn't matter if they're true or false, because true facts out of context can be just as misleading as out and out lies. So you have to get the history content first. That has to happen first. Because as Calvin Coolidge warned us about 100 years ago, the easiest way to tell a lie is to tell the truth out of context. Because when you try to fact check something that is an out of context truth, it will fact check as true. It's just out of context. So the history content knowledge has to come first. And all of our institutions in society really need to reject what has been going on for the last 40 years, which is people turning against the idea of content knowledge.
Okay, so Professor, let me interrupt the whole show with this subcategory. I was listening to NPR. I think it was yesterday, the day before. It was On Point by some name I can't, a really famous reporter, but I can't remember her name, Megan Chakravarty or something like that. But I listened to her show maybe, I don't know, 50 times over the last 50 years. I don't know. I don't listen all the time, but occasionally I hear her name and I recognize it. And she had a professor on from Yale, I think it was, um, and and they were talking about the Texas school standards. They just created a list that says, in order to be a high school graduate in Texas, you have to read the following books, and it's a list. It's actually a listing of books. I
Yeah.
haven't looked it up yet. And Megan, the reporter or columnist or whatever she is from NPR, had some critique and concern about that, because clearly there's some political books on there, some political bias books. And so she was asking the professor, and she goes, "Oh yeah, absolutely. They're purely there for political reasons, because they want to jab the left or the what, they want to stick it to the liberals." But the list is pretty good. This professor said it's pretty good. And if you want to challenge that, my request is that every liberal state come out with a list of your books, including your liberal books, and exclude the political books you don't like from Texas, but come out with your list of required reading that every student should read, because there's got to be a shared experience. There's got to be not only the knowledge, but we should have some handholds in society that we know we've all read that book, or we've all had that concept in our head. Do you have a reaction to that list, either from Ashbrook or Texas, or maybe you heard the report yourself, and I'm sure you kind of talk about this as professors? Can you give some instinct on, you say history first. Cool. What
Yeah.
history? What history is my question.
Well, first, let us agree that there should be a list because, again, for 50 years, we've been pushing against we've been told at work that everything is about critical thinking, critical thinking, critical thinking, but no content, skipping the part where you have to know something first. So if we could just win the battle to have a list, I'm already I'm on board. We're already rowing in the right direction. If
And,
it
and Professor, I know you've critiqued me many times of saying, John, you haven't been to school enough. We raised two daughters that went through the same schools that I went through too. And I thought their education was just as good as mine, but you're saying it wasn't. Their education isn't as good
maybe
as
it was, but if it was because every school district is different and every teacher is different. But if your daughter's got a good education, it was probably because they had teachers who really cared about content knowledge.
And you're
And
saying that there was a real theme that I'm just not familiar with enough, that we don't care about content. We don't care about not facts or truth
I would
or
say in the vast majority of school districts and in the vast majority of classrooms.
we just don't need to know what happened and what date and who said it and why they did what they did. We just don't
Yeah.
need to know that.
And you definitely don't need to read books. And the number of book, I mean, every single study of human beings over the last 50 years will confirm this. If Jake was here, he could pull up the numbers right away. But and I actually included this in one of my newer lectures. I haven't given it 1,000 times yet, but so it's not burned into my head. But the decline of literacy is absolutely stunning over the past 40 years. Um, and especially the level of literacy. So it's not just that people don't know how to read, it's the level of reading of every group of people in society. It has declined dramatically, in part because of the push to get so many people who were subpar up to average. But what that meant is that literacy declined for everybody else. And so what we have is, a temporary increase um, in the barely literate with the complete collapse of almost every other category of people.
And
So
you're saying, as you've said before, that we have hundreds of years of history in the United States of some very well-read people, and it's not just like the founders and not presidents. I mean, there's farmers and ranchers and
yeah,
electricians and people just were out there reading, and they read as part of being an
well,
American citizen or
for almost all of American history, we were dominated by Protestant Christians who believed that you had to study the Bible every single day. And so the level of literacy among most Americans was very high because it was a requirement of their religious beliefs.
But they
Uh,
didn't just stop at the Bible, though,
no, no, no,
right?
of course not. Because the other thing is, it was one of the things that you could use to combat rural isolation. So, a book is an amazing thing in that, once you have access to one, um, it can enrich your life over and over again. Like watching a movie that you really like. I don't know how many times I've read the book True Grit, but more than once. And again, for most of American history, most Americans were working on farms and in rural areas. So you don't really see, and even in cities, the literacy rate was incredibly high. In cities, you had this culture of literacy and civic engagement and politics because we had such a newspaper culture in cities. I mean, every city didn't just have one newspaper; they had multiple, daily newspapers competing for attention on every street corner. So we didn't just have a literate culture. We had a culture that was literate and would be considered very sophisticated by today's standards.
And you're saying it's really just a fact that today that's not true. That what reading tweets and little micro videos just don't it doesn't the learning experience isn't the same as a book.
Oh, of course not. No, it doesn't even, they don't even track the same way on the brain.
Huh. Well, I'm not sure what to think of that. Okay, so Professor, we do know you and I in our circles, we know we have a very well-read group. And so I guess I don't want to solve the illiteracy or declining, at least for today's show. But for the folks that do like reading occasionally and read long form blogs and magazine periodicals, whether it's online or otherwise, and books. I mean, Jake is a master reader. My God,
Yeah, yeah.
he just reads like crazy. And I know a ton of good readers. I mean, just people that read for a lifestyle choice. They like reading. And I'm a reader. So for the folks that are fairly well read, our circles, do we need to read more fantasy or do we need to read more poetry or do we need to read more biographies or do we need to read more
It's all good. I mean, especially, they're not the problem. So I don't, the fact that somebody's reading like fantasy novels or something, like, who cares? These people are not the problem in society. Like, let it go sick, go crazy.
well, what happens if we totally disagree though, Professor? Well-read, thoughtful, educated people and we totally disagree
Well,
on
I didn't get into politics in order to tell people how to live their lives, like, or how to spend their time. I'm here to report on what the consequences are. if we, in this particular case, move away from having a culture of literacy or shared ideas of citizenship, that sort of thing. But how a person spends their leisure time is, to my mind, entirely up to them. Yeah.
Well, okay, I concur with that. But what happens if we are careening off a cliff of not understanding America? And
Yeah.
not
Well, we have.
right. So
In
what do
some
we do,
cases, I think we've
Professor?
already gone off the cliff
Right. So what do we
because
do?
it, it's we've walked through this in previous shows, but understanding that once the first idea of getting rid of content was a radical idea in the 1970s. But by the 1980s, those radicals were occupying spaces in elite institutions across America. And by the 1990s, they were winning the arguments to remove content from teaching and learning. So what that means is that if you were a teacher and you went to school in the 1990s, you probably still had a good number of old professors who were resisting this trend, right? But what has happened is as radicals got control of hiring and firing in the 1990s, by the purging of old liberals out of higher education that took place in the 1990s and 2000s, if you're somebody who went to college to become a teacher in the 2000s to the 2010s, you might have never you might be a high school history teacher who never took history from anyone who was a specialist in political, diplomatic, or military history. That means that there were no experts in many history departments by the 2000s and 20 teens. So now, if you think about high school teachers, yeah, it's the same thing. You have old teachers who went through school years ago, and to them, content knowledge and knowing things, reading books, all of that stuff was normal. But if you're a young teacher who who had young professors, and you go into a school district with administrators who are grasping on to whatever the latest academic trends are, you don't have um, the ability to push back on or modify the curriculum in such a way so that you continue to be a good teacher. Because you have some administrators saying, "Oh, well, here's the latest thing that coming down from the state, that they're paying us to do this, so do this. Make this number this." And your job is no longer teaching your subject, but pleasing some administrator who has some metric from the state saying you get your money if you meet this metric. And the entire school, again, some good administrators, some good teachers, they know how to roll with the punches. They know how to, say, push back and at least say, what we do here is we teach children, you know. But if you have an administrator who is, say, politically ambitious and wants to get ahead, they view every job that they get as a stepping stone to their next job. And how do you get your next job? By goosing the numbers, making it look like you've achieved some miracle on some new state standard. And then you get to become the school administrator at the next larger school district. And you do the same thing, and you leave behind you in your wake, a trail of destruction of everything else that school was supposed to do, save some new state metric. And I just saw it happen time and time again in every, I mean, I have friends who teach all in, you know, And I do seminars with teachers who come from all over the country. I do three, four, five of these a year, and it brings together teachers from all 50 states. So I'm not just in contact with my friends who teach in other states at different levels. I'm in contact with the best high school teachers in America who win these scholarships, right? And some of them have great stories of great administrators who resisted this, and some of them, the vast majority of them, have stories about how they're the one person who resisted these trends. But
Well, so
yeah, go ahead.
Professor, this is all really interesting, and we should give you more due on this topic, and maybe we should have whether it's you or another guest, or talk specifically about education. But this show I intended this show to be about citizenship. And so most of us aren't professors or teachers. We're just humans trying to make a living and whatever. What is your guidance to the non-teacher and the non-student? And yes, I could go back to school, I guess, but I'm not probably ever formally going to go back to school. So
Well, the
how do we be?
number one, parents have a tremendous amount of influence over education. And what parents can do today, tomorrow, the next day is tell your high school and elementary school administrators that what you want is you want your son or daughter to have content knowledge, and you want to be able to measure how much content your child knows. And then when
That's probably the rise of charter schools, isn't it? Isn't that the kind of the movement of parents wanting to take control back over their education and set their curriculum for their students? And we're going to do the science or history or core something versus whatever the public schools are teaching. It's still public school, but we want this. Isn't that
yeah,
kind of the theme of
that's
charter?
certainly one of that was, I mean, if you think about why the rise of charter schools, why did it happen during the exact years when I'm describing
Yeah.
this trend? It's because parents were already detecting this. But you have to care about more than just, I mean, and this is hard, you have to care about more than just your kid. uh, but there's a lot of good news in this front, because essentially the push has been coming for so long that now other places modeled on, I mean, essentially you think about, I'm so proud and happy and lucky that I found the Ashbrook Center and the teaching American history people so early on in my career, because for 2 decades that it was them and maybe like one other place, like they were the last lighthouse with a light up saying we have to preserve history, content, teaching, knowledge, when it fell away everywhere else. And now we've got all of these centers. We interviewed Josh Dunn a while back,
Mhm.
and he brought Mosier over to Tennessee, and now I think there are 17 of these centers. So 17 states have said, um, essentially, like, our college system is so broken that we have to start a center that has control over hiring, promotion, and tenure, because all of those jobs that were lost during the political purges of the uh, 90s, 2000s, and 20 teens, each of those institutions now will never bring those jobs back. So we have to start a center within the college so that we can start hiring political, diplomatic, and military historians and start teaching content knowledge, not just in history, but a lot of them are coming back as so-called PPE programs, where it's politics, philosophy, economics, and history, you know, and they're creating these new degrees precisely because most Americans now, there's such mistrust and all-time high levels of mistrust of higher education. What people want is the ability to know that if I see this degree from this college, it means that a person knows something. And so, because what's going to happen at these 17 or and I don't know how many, 17, 19 odd centers, is that every person who goes to these centers, they're all going to get jobs. They're because what employers want is they want to know that if they hire somebody, they know something. They're not just some like doofus who worked the system. And the same thing goes for the new University of Austin.
So,
Um,
Professor, how much of this, and help me if you're inclined, to talk civics for a citizen, not civics for a student or teacher. How much of this is infused in the political debates of wokeism and or left and right? And I know you don't like those terms, but is this debate that has affected governors and presidents uh, so on the same path, or is an outcome, or are they responding? I mean, like, should we ignore the extremes, or do the somebody needs to be extreme once in a while to show how bad it's been? I mean, you've never been an extreme. You explain the most controversial of issues in a thoughtful, rational way. Gays, abortion, you just wade right in with thoughtfulness. But you're rare. It seems like everybody else has to take a side and just be as extreme as possible to beat up on the other extremists. Um, from a citizen's role, how do we pay more attention to current events in order to
yeah,
solve this, or do we pay more attention to history? You said history. Just got to go back to history.
yeah. I mean, for me, this would be an issue that I would certainly vote over. But I also want to just modify one thing. I don't like the terms right and left when you
Right,
apply them to like people who aren't actually monarchists or socialists. But
right.
you deal with so many people who now reject the American political system that it is appropriate to refer
And they
to
are left.
it's a person that person is of the left, right? They want to use the system in order to destroy the system. I mean, there was an interview where that woman, the number two woman at the DSA said,
Their
"What we're doing
spokesperson.
is we're going to destroy the Democratic Party by taking it over from." And Steve Bannon said he wanted to destroy the Republican, use Donald Trump to destroy the Republican Party. So,
So we can
and
refer to Trump and Bannon as the right.
yeah, yeah, they
Yeah.
they absolutely want to destroy the American system of government and turn it into some sort of post-liberal monarchy. I mean, there's various,
Okay, Professor, maybe
but
that's the reason I've had some angst. And this is interesting that we've kind of come around to one of my concerns with society, and
can I interrupt you just real
please,
fast? Because I want to tell one other story about,
please,
like you said, you had your conversation with the DSA person.
yeah.
And, most of my life I've spent around political radicals and student radicals. And I would sometimes, when I would talk to them, I would ask them a series of questions. And I would say, "Do you care about this issue?" And I'd say, "Yes, I do." Do you value? Do you think that knowledge is important? And they would say, "Yes, absolutely." And I'd say, "Can you prove to me that you care about this issue by reading 3 books on the subject?" And the answer was always no. I would say, like, all I'm asking you to do is you're the one who says that you care about this issue.
Hmm.
And all I'm saying is before you wade in on the subject, read 3 real scholarly books on the subject and then come back and talk to me. And you want to know something? It never happened. Not once. So, you know, just know that you're often talking to someone who has absolutely no interest in what they're saying. They don't actually care about it. Because if they actually cared about it, they would go back and read those 3 books and then come back and talk to me. But it never happens because they don't actually care about the stuff. They're doing it for some other reason.
Okay, well, I lost my point now, but I'm going to
Yeah,
go
sorry.
back.
But
No,
what does
you're
that have to
right.
do
It's
with current
pathetic.
events? I think it's important to continue to engage with these people, not so much for them, but because there's always somebody watching. And almost, I've friends and kids and students over the years who flirt with radical politics. And what usually happens is, um, I wouldn't say usually, but this does happen occasionally. Um, they'll see an interaction between me and the said radical, and I'll just say, look, you're making an assertion, I'm making an assertion. How about this? We look up what the answer is, and then whoever is wrong has to change their mind. And that other person always says no. But person number three, they see that and then they look it up and go, "Oh my God, this person was lying to me this whole time. They have any idea what they're talking about." And it's that, but you have to be willing to stand there and you have to be willing to engage. Um, Otherwise, uh, the more angry, loud voice will just keep going.
Yeah,
Somebody.
I think that's wise. The one, no, not the one. It sounds like the one. It's just an example that you've done is your little essay mini treatise. It's just a page long about racism, and it says you want to talk race. That's great. I'm glad. I want you to talk about race. Let's all. I'm willing to talk about race. But before you spend too much time on it, read the following books and a couple essays and an article here. And then if you don't have that much time, well, then just read these three things. It's a really excellent essay. I just wish that was published far and wide.
Well, I do that all, but that is a reflection of what I say a lot when I'm
Yeah,
in public
your
forum.
style.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so will you just keep writing some more on that on other topics? Like if you really want to talk about the founding, are we a slaver society or are we? I mean, you don't have to repeat Morgan's book, but
Yeah.
it'd be nice to say you read that and this, and here's a shorter essay
Well,
from.
this is in my eternal struggle, which is that I put myself in front of as many students as possible.
Love that. Love that.
But it takes time. You know,
Yeah.
an average teaching load, if you were interviewing, if I were teaching at Ashland University or at University of Tennessee or something like that, I would have what's called a 4-4 teaching load, right? Which means I would be teaching 8 classes total a year, and each class would have 20 to 40 students, or I might have one large lecture or something, some combination of seminars with 12 students, maybe a large lecture with 120 students, but I would have teaching assistants doing all of the grading. I don't teach 8 classes a year. I'm currently teaching 9 classes, and I don't have any teaching assistants. So I grade every paper, and my average class size, some of them are as big as 80, and some of them are as small as 45, but my average class size is 65.
Do you really
So,
have 60? Actually, for some reason, I thought you'd have like 30 or 40 for some reason. I don't know why we've never had
well,
this.
in person, it's limited by the fire marshal, how many seats can fit in the
Yeah.
room. So that's limited at 45.
Okay.
But,
And you have 20 online, huh?
yeah, yeah. But my point is, not to make an excuse, but um, I taught 9 to 18. I taught 23 classes last year, averaging 65 students per class. Uh, I graded times 4 of that in essays myself without a teaching assistant. In addition to that, I did 4 seminars, plus I taught 2 classes at Ashland.
Yeah.
And
So, Professor, I'm lousy at math. That's why I went to law school. But 25 classes times 60 students is 1,500 students in a year. Ballpark.
yeah, and
Is that
then
right?
times 4, yeah. And
Yeah.
I think I once calculated I teach 10% of the students at a college that with 13,000 students. So,
Yeah.
um, and that's
All right.
in addition to the stuff that so I'm only saying this because I have to rebalance this, and you make me think about it all the time because um, I don't know if I'm lazy or I just don't have a very good brain, but I try to be up for my morning classes and my lectures so that my students who are in person get my best, you
Yeah, I
know.
love that.
And but by the afternoon, I'm pretty tired and I'm
Yeah,
just not capable of doing good work. Right now, I was thinking about writing here's the writing project I would do next. I have these two books, The Revolutionary Center by Adrian Woolridge and What Happened to Liberal Democracy by Darren Asimoglu. And I was thinking of proposing doing like a review essay of these two books. And I'm pretty sure I could get it published somewhere. But I'm looking at my calendar and I'm just like, I don't know when I would have hours with my fresh mind,
right, right, right. I get that.
in order to do it. So I try to publish one or two things a year just so I can still claim to be a historian. But it's just I don't know. I don't know what helps. I don't know if writing on Substack helps. I don't know if writing on Facebook helps. I don't know if writing in journals helps. I'm trying to be helpful,
Yeah,
but I just don't know. And I don't know. And I talk about this with Steve Knott a lot because we we agree very much that all we want to do is do what we do in order to save America.
I
You
love
know,
that.
like, but we're constantly asking ourselves, like, is this right? Should I be doing more of this and less of this? Should I be, And here's the other thing: I'm no hero. I get paid for all of this. So
Right,
there's also every time I don't teach a class, it not only my income goes down.
right. Or
Uh, so
if you review an essay for a major periodical, you get paid for that too. Yeah, so
not
there's
real. I mean, the amount of work you don't do it for the money, because yeah, there are easier ways to make money than publish articles. Like they don't pay very much. So,
right.
I mean, even the most important national, like you couldn't make a living, or at least I couldn't. Maybe I
Okay.
could if I did nothing but it, but like, yeah.
Okay, so Professor, I think you've given us the answer that we've got to spend more of our time on history in our chosen areas of interest in order to save America.
But it has
And
to be I want to really emphasize this. It has to be content. You can't, one of the things that drives me insane, like because we have to hire adjuncts, we have to hire part-time people. And we get these people who come in and they're supposed to give a 15-minute teaching presentation. And every one of these people has a master's degree in history. And every one of them has teaching experience in a high school. And what I think most Americans would find shocking is that there would be 100 of these people who can't come in and pretend to know the content of any subject with 2 weeks notice for 15 minutes.
oh, they get notice on what the topic
Yeah.
is?
If I gave you 2 weeks
Right.
notice to give a 15-minute presentation on any subject in history, don't you think that you, with 2 weeks notice, could put together a 15-minute presentation on it? And
And
to
it's for a
know
job,
that
right? It's not just for a hobby, it's for a job.
yeah, and this is for a job, and
Yeah,
allegedly this is what you do for a living. And
right. Yeah.
every time I interview these people, I just want to know, what is your high school classroom like? You've been teaching high school for 30 years, and you can't give me a 15-minute presentation on the Mexican-American War or the Iran hostage crisis or the origins of the Cold War. Like, it doesn't matter what the topic is, but it's like you've been in the classroom for 20 years, and apparently all you do is walk into the room and ask students how they feel about pictures. And it is scary that that's the majority of what we see in job interviews.
Okay, so you're more
This
chagrined
crisis
than I.
is deep.
Yeah, yeah, you're more chagrined than I am. And I do really appreciate that you're having deep conversations with people like Professor Knott and your a bunch of your other professor friends too. Because I do think we need to do better job as citizens. And I'm not talking professors. I'm talking just about the mechanic down the street and the nurse at the hospital over the next street over. People that I in my life. I want us
Hey,
all to
this
be.
morning at the pool, I didn't even get to swim because the guy in the lane next to me wanted to give me an earful. And I was like, look, I gotta swim. I gotta get back, you know. But, I only
You
had this
honestly didn't swim
reserved for a
today?
half
You're,
hour. And the first 16 minutes was the guy in the lane next to me letting me have it. I mean, this is America. I love it, But if you
yeah.
think, like Americans care about this stuff enough to yell at the history professor in the lane next to them.
That is hilarious. Did you learn anything, or was he just ranting?
No, yeah. I mean, he's a smart, thoughtful guy. Like, I mean, he's a working class, he's a fire instructor, but he's a normal guy who tries to be, but here's the thing, he genuinely cares about America. So, like, I want to listen to what he has to say, even if I have to swim a little
Yeah.
fast to get
Yes,
out of the
yes.
pool and on time, you know.
That's lovely. I've got a social event in 2 weeks doing that exact same thing, where we're just going to gather over beers and we're going to talk politics and culture and about whether America's in trouble or not, and some suggestions from my military experience, a sit rep of how should we be concerned, and if we are concerned, what we should do about it. Yeah, I love that stuff. And this is just with they're not with mayors, and it's just regular people we're inviting,
Yeah.
and so thank you for doing not swimming today as much as you wanted to. Let's interrupt ourselves and see if Jeff has any questions or comments because I got to leave in 10 minutes. So, Jeff, I know we were all over the board today, but you're pretty insightful in trying to suss out what we're talking about. Are you still with us today, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm here.
Give us some thoughts on whatever angle you wish to take from anything we've talked about.
Well, I had two thoughts. I'm not sure which one to focus on. I guess I'll give one and then focus on the other one. So the discussion about um, teachers not being able to even teach the stuff that they're supposed to teach makes me wonder, should we have a standard for uh, what schools teach? And it came as a surprise to a lot of people that the Department of Education, that wasn't their job. They didn't create a curriculum for every American student. That was left to the states. And you kind of wonder, and this ties into my second point, you kind of wonder if that's I love federalism, but maybe that's not the right answer for there not to be a base right of education the way that there are base rights in the Bill of Rights, for example. And that leads me back to the discussion about charter schools. So, the concept of charter schools when it came up was solid. Some of our public schools really aren't up to it. And so parents should have the ability to go get a school that does better. The fact was, though, they had that ability, which was private school. Lots of people, lots of parents who want their kids taught religion send their kids to a religious school and they pay for it one way or the other. And so I guess I'd kind of want to get your guys' thoughts on, should charter schools really be publicly funded? And if so, should they have to follow the same whatever standards we have, uh, for what kids are taught? And it kind of goes to, kids are taught what their parents want their kids to be taught, which can include things that are just plain wrong, right? I mean, you look at the state of Texas and Oklahoma that's insisting that the Ten Commandments have to be taught in every school. Well, there's lots of people who don't believe that. So is that a legitimate use of public taxpayer money to force things that other people don't believe in? And some things are just factual, not faith-based.
All
So
right,
I'm
lots to
interested in
cover in
your
6 minutes,
thoughts.
Professor. Lots to cover, and then you'll have a follow up if you'd like, Jeff, on whatever he says. Professor.
The first thing about the national standards is always kind of interesting because when I say this stuff about the decline of education, people will say like, "Isn't there a curriculum that people have to follow?" The answer is yes. But most of the problem comes in hiring and in the political discrimination in hiring, because what ends up happening is, at least in the state of California, until the Department of Education pointed it out, one of the things I used to do is I would say, pull out your phone and Google what qualifies for the American Institution standards at UCLA. You now can't do this anymore because they have cleaned it up because the Department of Education finally did it. But all that was happening was there was like a class on, gender studies in, pre-Columbian South America that they just said was like, this counts towards American institutions. It was like they just get around the fact that there's a state standard by simply using the flexibility that they had to just essentially not have the standard at all, as long as you were controlling of the institutions. And it finally took someone, and again, we're not Trump fans on this podcast, but they did finally at the Department of Education say, you have these standards where you say American institutions, and none of these classes have anything to do with American history, and they have nothing to do with studying American ideals or institutions. So you need to stop that. Students need to actually take a class on American ideals and institutions. But the next thing that needs to be solved is you hire someone who hates America and knows nothing about American ideals and institutions, and you hire that person to teach the class and then say, well, now we've satisfied the standard. Um, as for charter schools, every state is a little bit different, but in California, uh, you know, ex well, I mean, the Supreme Court has already decided this. You can't discriminate on the basis of religion in funding education. I mean, and most of those state laws were sort of anti-Catholic laws. But most people, it's funny because the decline of religion in America has not led to the decline in religious education in America, precisely because religious schools were often the ones that had the highest standards. So in my own hometown, the two best schools were the Catholic school and the Anglican school. you know, and the next best school was the Dutch Reformed school. And so all the rich people in my city send their kids to either a Catholic school, the Anglican school, and after they go to the Anglican school for their K-8, they then go to the Dutch Reformed school. Now, these people are not Anglicans and they're not Dutch Reformed, but what they want is they want us to send their kids to a school where they still learn some content. But I would also say, and as somebody whose sister founded two different charter school districts, um, I don't want to abandon public education because the vast majority of people don't, don't have time or the expertise to scrutinize every subject that your kid takes home. I mean, I certainly would look at the work that my kids were doing in school, and I would just be like, this is what you're doing in school? Like, this is how you're spending your day? And then I would think like, well, but the crazy thing is it's so idiosyncratic. Some of it incredibly challenging. If you have a good teacher and a hard subject, and then some of it was just a complete joke. Uh, and it's a subject too big to summarize in, you know, 7 minutes. But I guess I would just say I do have a fundamental faith in the American people to work out these problems if we don't let the institutions collapse. because people do push back, you know. Um, so what I'm and if it isn't the American people, eventually it's the employers. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've talked to CEOs who hire, and they say to me, in addition, if I hire somebody from this state school, I have to then give them a literacy test.
Mhm.
Essentially, job applicants are now screened for literacy, even if they have graduated from college. So e- eventually, those kinds of pressures will cause institutions to reform and rebound.
Okay, we're
Eventually,
almost out of
we just
time.
got to get back to content testing.
Yep. We're almost out of time. Jeff, quick follow up.
Yeah, it is too big a topic for this amount of time, but I got snagged on one thing that Professor Tootle said that maybe we should have a further exploration on. The somebody who hates America. Let's at some point talk about the difference between hating America and having the ability to look critically at mistakes that we've made and so that we don't make them again, because
Well,
those are
somebody
not the
who
same
looks
thing.
critically at the mistakes that we've made loves America. Someone who wants to destroy American ideals and institutions hates America.
That's fair. I think that it's too easy to paint the former as the latter.
Sure. But it's
Yeah.
not hard to tell the difference. I mean,
Unless you're
they
in
usually
politics,
tell on themselves, you know.
if you're paying attention. But if
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
using it for political gain,
I remember asking, well, oh, and I also sometimes default to the Tom Brasino patriotism test, which I know I've mentioned before, but he says if you want to know if somebody's patriotic, you ask them. And if it takes more than 30 seconds to answer, the answer is no.
Yeah. I like that test as well. And I do think we should have that topic more because I think there's too many citizens throwing their hate at a whole group of other citizens in the wrong way, or I don't know if they mean it or if they just like to stir up trouble, or maybe they truly do think they hate a whole group of other citizens and they probably don't. I think that is a worthwhile topic, Jeff. So thanks
You
for,
know what we should have in future, just the topics for future shows.
yeah.
Um, got to get Brasino back on here. We got to get Derek Katzum back on here, and especially the person who might be one of the top experts in the left, the role that the left played in Democratic Party politics is Jeff Bloodworth. We got to get him back on the show. Uh, and then maybe towards the end of the year, we got to get Jeff Dunn back on here because he's literally running one of these centers. You know,
Yeah.
and the stuff that he is doing is just it's what should be happening in all 50 states. So
Um, Off the record, Professor, I know we're recording and this is going to go
yeah,
on the internet, so I don't really mean off the record,
yeah.
but as an inaccurate stereotype, is it true though that is this perception of mine semi-accurate that Jeff Dunn is kind of a classic conservative and John Mosier, who he hired, another PhD professor, two PhD professors, is more of a centrist moderate conservative. I mean, they're not the same cookie cutter approach.
I don't think any of us are.
Well, that's a
The
good point.
same as Brasino. Bloodworth is a liberal.
Yeah.
Cathdom is a radical liberal. The Moser is
Yeah, you
more of a libertarian.
libertarian maybe is right.
Classical liberal. Dunn's a little bit conservative-y. Tony Williams and Brasino are both Catholic. Like that plays into it. It's all. None of us are
We're
the
all,
same.
we're
But
all different,
thing
huh?
is, they all like America. you
Yeah.
know, and they
Well,
all agree that like facts matter.
I
Uh,
love that. Okay, we got to end for today. We are going to have a series of more conversations in the fall. Do think of another professor or two that it may be a stranger that we don't know well, because I like those conversations where we're both kind of on edge trying to figure out where the conversation's going. So yes, we will have some of your professor friends back, and let's get a zinger in or two. And I'll do that thinking, but I just don't want to do it alone. If you'll think of somebody that we want
sure.
to interview just because it'd be fun. Um, Cool. Gentlemen, thank you so very much. I'm glad to see you again. I've missed you for almost a month. So thanks, Professor Jeff. You always had good content. Have a great day, gentlemen.
Take it easy.
You. Thanks. Bye.